It sounds like y'all have had an exciting summer, especially with a tornado warning in the middle of it. We had a wedding one time that brought a tornado warning, and our siren for the area where we are is in the corner of our parking lot. And so we had the reception in the metal building out behind the main building, and the door was open, and it was just echoing through there. Woo! I mean, just so loud. And so we all took our cake and punch and went down to the basement across the parking lot and finished up the wedding there. So I've been to a similar situation, so I understand. He should have just kept preaching when he got to the basement. That would have worked out better. So I know y'all would have loved that and appreciated that. But I hope you've had a great summer. I know your series has been wonderful as far as the speakers and the ones that I've seen on the schedule, and I appreciate being a part of that. I've had an interesting summer myself. 10 weeks ago today, I had my right hip replaced. And so now I'm half new again. And my left one says, hey, I'm next. And so I asked him, you may be seeing me as a little taller than the last time I was here, because I asked my surgeon, I said, can you make me any taller when you put the new hip in? And he said, I'll do my best. So I don't think, I'm still not 6 feet tall. So, but anyway, glad to be here. Very thankful always to be able to come to North Highlands. It's one of my favorite places to come, and have known several of you for a long time, and very, very thankful to be here for that. I did look at the schedule, and I think Justin Pinnell must have got to pick his lesson topic before I did, because Justin has small children at home, and he picked how to deal with empty nest time in your life. And I thought, how did he end up with that? He ought to be talking about teaching your children how to worship. I ought to be talking about empty nest situation. So anyway, I'm sure he did a great job, and I'm sure he was completely wrong about all of it, because he has no idea, just yet what that's like. So, and I'll tell him that when I get back to Florence too. What a great topic, though, teaching our children how to worship God. Proverbs 22 and verse 6 comes to mind, doesn't it? That we are to train up a child the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. And that's always the ideal. It's not a guarantee, but it is a hope that if we do our job as parents to train children, that they will respond to that. Ephesians 6:4, especially to us dads, that we're not to provoke our children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Many times, whatever version you have, it may say training and admonition of the Lord. So again, there's a lot of training involved with having children, or at least that's our responsibility as parents, is to help them. And not only parents, but as a congregation. All of us are here to help one another raise our children. I can tell you from the congregations that I've preached for since my children were born, they've been a great influence and help to all of our children, and very thankful for that. But training is important. I used to preach at a little church above Luverne, Alabama. Anybody know where Luverne is? If you're down in Crenshaw County in South Alabama, about an hour south of Montgomery. When I was a student at Faulkner University, I had the privilege of having this preaching job between my junior and senior year of college. So I was 21 years old. I was thrilled that I had this preaching job and scared to death all at the same time. I had preached 2 full-length sermons when I got this job. And I thought, man, I'm excited to have a job, but what am I going to do? Every week I've got to come up with something. And so while I was preaching there, I was part-time. It was a 35-member church. I had to work at a bank in Montgomery to kind of support myself. And so I got this job with the bank, but you had to go through several weeks of training before they would turn you loose to have a money drawer and be a teller. And so we had this lady who trained us there in Montgomery. Her name was Miss Mims, and she had been there for 95 years, I believe, because she had been there. I mean, she was there and had trained everybody who'd ever worked there. Well, I called her Sergeant Mims because she was pretty rough. Okay, so I start training, and I could handle the money part, but the machine and running all the different checks through and receipts and such, it was an old machine, and so there were times where I would hit the wrong button. She'd reach over there and slap my hand. And I was like, oh my, I was almost scared to touch anything after that. So here she was trying to get me ready to work on my own, but she was tough on everybody. And I remember after about 2 or 3 weeks of training, she looked down her nose and had her glasses down. She said, I don't know if you're going to make it or not. And I thought, oh, I got to have a job. Come on, I'm not that bad, am I? She kept me 2 extra weeks in training beyond everybody else because she just felt like I needed it. So she spent all that time with me, and finally I was able to go out and work my window and ended up staying 2 or 3 years with them there. And she became a friend of mine, but I wasn't sure if I'd ever be friends with her. But that training, anything worthwhile in life, anything meaningful, we need to be trained, don't we? We have training in our jobs. We have training when we go to college. We have training wherever we go to do certain tasks. But how do we train, how do we teach our children how to worship God? We really don't have any set instructions that are just handed to us when we leave the hospital and says, well, here's all the responsibilities that you're supposed to take care of as a parent. We all have to learn on our own, don't we? We have to figure it out. Now, we know what our parents did with us, and so we emulate a lot of those things. But how do we especially instill the spiritual desire within our children to serve and worship God? And I know you've already been talking about this in some respects, but specifically with worship, how do we do that? How do we help them as they're little babies all the way up until they're teenagers and even into college? Well, I had to think back, and I can't tell you that my memory is that great, because when I had this topic assigned to me, I looked and I thought, well, I really don't remember what we did to help our children learn about worship, because that was so long ago. Our youngest one's about to turn 25, and so I started thinking back and reminiscing and having actually a lot of fun trying to figure this out. But I think the basics are already in your mind. You just need to be reminded of them. And so tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to do two simple things that you can remember of how to teach your children how to worship God. First of all, we show them what the Bible says. Obviously, that's where we begin, is it not? We have instructions given by God because this is what He's revealed Himself to us in this form so that we would know who He is and what He expects out of us. And so obviously this is the place that we need to start with ourselves as individuals as well as our children. And so when we turn to the Bible, we obviously see that God does not leave it up to man to figure out how to worship Him. He gives instruction. He started back in the patriarchal age, and we see Cain and Abel worshiping Him already, by chapter 4. We then find several instructions, detailed instructions about worshiping God and serving Him during the days of the Israelites. And we got a lot of details about how they were to worship and honor Him, didn't we? And then New Testament, we still have instruction, even though it's not spelled out as clearly as Old Testament. We have a couple of examples. We have several scriptures where we know what we're supposed to do to honor and worship our God. But let me just say, when it comes to showing our children what the Bible says, let me just take a step back and say it doesn't have to be a sit-down Bible study. I think that's the thing that we kind of get in our minds. Now, it can be, especially at a certain age where they can receive it that way. But think about when they're real small, when they're even babies. You have the opportunity to start with those little things that help them to understand who God is, to understand respect for Him, all those things that come to mind. Deuteronomy chapter 6 through 9 comes to mind, doesn't it, when we start thinking about our responsibility as parents. And I think that what Moses says here reminds us that when we think about our role, it doesn't have to be that formal. Matter of fact, I think it's more effective if we do it as we go through life and as we have what I call spiritual conversations with our children. And I think that's exactly what he's talking about here. He says, "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you're in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as signs on your hand, and they shall be to you as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and in your gates. So what picture do you have there? Okay? He's talking about writing them in certain places and all, but he's talking about having these conversations as you go through life. And he says, you're supposed to talk about God's Word when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way. And I can't help but think about opportunities maybe that we have to talk to our children about spiritual things just in everyday life. And I recall a lot of those times in the car. You know, we're just driving down the road and somebody says, oh, look at that beautiful field out there with the flowers. And then we start talking about God, and we start talking about who made those beautiful flowers. And we take it from there to maybe we might mention a scripture, but we make reference to what God says. Now, when they're little bitty, you know, you start thinking about bringing them into worship. And right now, we have had a baby boom at Stony Point. Every time I get up to preach, it's like a competition. Who can be louder, Brad or the babies? And it's like something I do sets them off, and they start crying as soon as they hear my voice. And so sometimes, there you go. I was going to say, somebody poked that child. Hey, don't worry, I'm used to it. I don't even know if I can preach without a crying baby. Yeah, it's been so long. So, you know, when we have those, isn't it great to have crying babies in church, though? That tells you there's a future, tells you got, another generation coming up. But also, every time you hear one of those children cry, it reminds you, hey, there's another one that we need to help train to know who God is. And so I think that's so important. Now, how do we do it when they're little? Now, this is not going to be a class necessarily tonight on parenting 101 from a spiritual standpoint from little all the way up. But I do want us to kind of have the concept and really cover all those ages. You know, first of all, you have them as small children. You just teach them respect. You teach them to be quiet, sit still, all those things. Once they get to that point where they understand what you're talking about, that they understand that, hey, worship is a special time and it's a special place that we go and we gather with all these other people to worship God. And we start to instill those things when they're very small. My first wife, as you probably remember, passed away of cancer back many years ago. She was 33 years old, and we had two children. Courtney was 8 and Braxton was 6 at that point. And I was preaching at Northport Church, Tuscaloosa County. And I remember several weeks after we had her funeral, I'm preaching on a Sunday night, and Braxton, my youngest one, he was 6 at that point, he said, Daddy, I want to sit with you tonight. Well, he hadn't been able to sit with me very much because halfway through the service, I get up, and for the next 30 minutes or so, he's without anybody. And at age 6, that's kind of dangerous. And so he was adamant, though, Daddy, I want to sit with you tonight. So I said, okay. We sat on the front pew. And I told him before I got up to preach at night, I said, now, you cannot move now. You can't get up and play around or anything like that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So he was sitting there. Well, I'm preaching, and I'm about 10, 15 minutes into it. And, we have the fan-shaped auditorium like this, and I was preaching over here. And I come back over here, and he's sitting about right here in front of me. And I see that look on his face. He's going. And I've seen that many times. He's got to go to the bathroom, okay? And we have a big college group, down at University of Alabama. We got this big old college group right across the aisle from him. They're all sitting up front. And I look over there, and they're grinning. They notice, and I'm like, okay, one of those guys is going to have a heart and help me out here and take him to the bathroom. So I go back to preaching. I look over here. Well, and then I come back over here. It's getting worse and worse. And while you're preaching, Philip knows this, you can multitask while you're preaching. I've got Bible coming out of my mouth, but I'm thinking, if he wets his pants, this sermon is over, okay? And what do? And I thought, I hate to stop my sermon because that's kind of embarrassing for a preacher to have to stop and talk to your child about his bathroom need. But at this point, I thought, I've got to do that because if he wets himself, he's going to cry, and it's just going to be even worse. So I stopped, and I said, by the way, none of the college students helped out, obviously. I looked at him, I said, Braxton, do you have to go to the bathroom? He went, yes. And I said, well, go. He didn't move because I told him, do not move. I mean, he would have sat there until, like I said, he had an accident. So he runs up the aisle, and everybody's laughing. Well, then he comes skipping back in and sits back down. I thought, okay, and everybody laughs then too. But, that's part of when they're little like that. You start training and teach them, listen, we have to have respect for God when we come before him in worship. And part of that is let's sit still and let's do our best to be respectful of those around us. And then that age, that training shifts to when they get older. And you start to talk to them more about things that they can understand at certain ages. And so as they grow, that continues. But I think there are mainly three questions I think that they need to know the answer to. The first one is why? Why are we here on Sunday? Why are we here to worship God? Why are we sitting in this building with all these other people? At some point, obviously, they're going to notice that we do that every week, and they're going to ask why. And I think that's where we start talking about God being our creator. We start talking about him being the one who is God above all of us. He made us. He's worthy of our worship. And so we honor him by doing so. And I love what Psalm 86 says in verses 8 through 13. Psalm 86. And this was one that I was not that familiar with until I got to preparing for this lesson tonight. Psalm 86, beginning in verse 8. It says, among the gods, there is none like you, O Lord, nor are there any works like your works. I didn't bring my glasses with me tonight, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here. That's the next best thing. He says in verse 9, all nations whom you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name. For you are great and do wondrous things. You alone are God. Teach me your way, O Lord. I will walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. I will praise you, O Lord, my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forevermore. For great is your mercy toward me, and you have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. And so here you see an example among many in the Psalms of David expressing himself before God. And notice how he describes him. You, O Lord, you are the one who has made all things. You are the one who has blessed me in all these ways. And I will glorify your name. I will worship you. I will bow before you. And so scriptures like that, and by the way, if you want to teach about worship, Psalms are filled with psalms of praise and ways to show reverence to God. And I think it's a great study. And so the first question is why? Why do we worship him? Because he is our creator. He's our God, and he is worthy of our worship. And we understand that as we come before him every week and as we live before him every day. The second question is how? How do we go about this? How do we learn how to worship? How did you learn how to worship? Did you read the manual? Most of us, now I didn't grow up going to church. I didn't start going to church until I was 15 years old, almost 16. And so a lot of my experience in church was hit and miss. I'd go visit with a friend or a family member here and there. And I always liked to go to whatever church had the donuts on Sunday morning. That was my favorite, But I went a lot of different places, but I just didn't have much experience at all with church till I was 15, and I started attending church in Anniston, where I'm from. And, as I got there, I'd been to church before, but I really wasn't sure what all was expected or involved in that. And my neighbor who invited me, she was a sweet older lady, and she and her husband, I rode with them until I got my driver's license, but they were telling me kind of almost a play-by-play of this is what we're going to do next, and this is what you do. And so I followed the instructions of my neighbor. There's always somebody that tries to help us understand that, whether it's a parent or a friend that brought us. But we kind of learn from each other, do we not? I mean, every church that I've ever been a part of since I was 15 years old worships God almost the same way every Sunday. Now, I've visited and gone to preach at other places, and you might have a little variation of the order. You might have an extra prayer or two. There are places that do it wrong because they don't do it like us, but, I say that because we kind of get our mind on that we have the right order. But seriously, we start having an understanding of worship based on worshiping with other people. And so we kind of are trained in that way. And so that's how we go about it. We know that from the Bible, we must sing praise to God. We must pray to Him, as the early church did, and they did all these things. And that's where we get it from the book of Acts. They gave on the first day of the week. They preached on the first day of the week. They took the Lord's Supper upon the first day of the week as they gathered together. Now, another answer to how, no doubt John 4:24 comes to mind, does it not? It tells us that God is spirit. Those that worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. And I like the way one fellow put it. He says, it's about your attitude and your actions. The spirit part is having the right mindset. And the truth is doing it according to what God says. And so we understand that God expects us to worship Him in spirit and in truth and doing the things that He's commanded us to do. So the Bible tells us how to worship Him. And it kind of tells us each aspect of how to go about those items of worship, as we call them. But God is again giving us instructions, and so that's where we start. When we start showing our children how to worship God, we show them what the Bible says. So that's number one. Number two is we show them by our example. They're looking at us from day one, are they not? And they are going to be like us, whether we want them to be or not. They will do certain things that we do. They'll pick up our habits. They will look like us. My dad is 86 years old now, and one of my best friends tells me every time he sees me, he said, "You look just like your dad." That drives me crazy sometimes because I'm like, do I look like I'm 86? I'm 55, but what he's saying is, you favor him. And now, my son is a member at Cox Boulevard Church in Sheffield. Braxton, the one who had to go to the bathroom. He's married now, and we had some folks that sat behind us at an event the other day, and they looked at me and they said, "Is your son Braxton?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, he looks just like you." And I said, "Well, don't tell him that, because that'll make him probably cringe like they tell me when I look like my dad." But, they do. They look like us. They act like us. And so, as parents especially, we've got to be the example that shows them how to worship God. Now, that means, first of all, we need to know what we're doing, right? And we all learn by doing. Anytime we learn something new or we develop an ability to do something, it's always through practice. And so we start there and say we have to be worshipers ourselves. And our children will follow that example even more than they follow the teaching that we give them. That saying is, they'll always do what you do more than do what you say. And that's true, is it not? They will end up having the same habits and follow the same ways. But how do we do that? How can we teach them to worship God by our example? Well, number one is be here. Come to worship. That's to me, I guess, being that I didn't grow up in church, showing up is the very minimum you can do for God. I mean, where else should a Christian be on Sunday except worshiping God in the assembly? Unless we're sick or unless we can't be there for some reason, it should be understood with ourselves, with our family. There should never be a time where our children have to ask, "Are we going to church today?" That answer is always going to be the same. We're always going. No need to even ask. because that's what we do as Christians. We go and worship God every Sunday. And so that's where we start, is we show up, we're here like we're supposed to be. Now, it's amazing, obviously, from being a preacher for many years, we have Monday morning we meet, me and our secretary and one of our elders always comes on Monday, and we go through what we call the absentee list. We have a printout of every member of the church, and they're supposed to do this QR code, but a lot of people don't do that, and we don't get everybody's information like we should, so we do our best to make it as accurate as possible. So here we go. We go down the list. Did you see such and such? Yeah, they were here. They were in the balcony. Okay. We go through that list, and inevitably, there are people who are always not there. There are names on there that we never get to mark out because we didn't see them. And we'll check on them, and they might show up for a week or two, and then they're out for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's sporadic like that. And it's so disturbing because I'm thinking, well, yeah, you can go on a vacation, you can go on this trip or be out of town for this ball game, but 3 or 4 weeks, we don't see these people. And I look at that list, and it's several. I mean, if we had everybody there at one time, I don't know if we could seat everybody. Think about that. Everybody who's supposed to be there, if everybody showed up, we'd have a problem with parking and seating. Wouldn't that be a great problem to have? So, obviously, not everybody has that commitment. And I'm not trying to shame anybody. I'm just simply saying, is God not worthy of us showing up every week to honor Him? I mean, that's just a given for me, because when I committed to following Jesus, I said, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there. And my kids are going to be there. And I'm thankful to say, and they've had bumps in the road, but all 4 of our children are faithful to God as adults. And 2 of them are married, and I'm so thankful for what they do as far as making that same commitment. We've had 1 or 2 of our children who've had those times where they weren't faithful or they weren't consistent, but it wasn't because we didn't teach them. It was because they were trying to find their way, and all of us have been there. Every family has those situations. And so, how do we become the right example? We need to be consistent. We need to show up and be here. The second thing connected to that, now hang on to your pew now. Second thing is, you need to participate once you get here. As a preacher, I can see everybody. I mean, I'm looking at you just like you're looking at me. And I know who's awake and is asleep. I mean, for some reason you think there's some kind of film or something where we can't see through that and see you or something. I don't know. But when I'm sitting up there, the psalm before the lesson, I'm sitting up on the stage and I'm looking out and we're singing. Do you know there's probably 1/4 of the people in the pews that aren't opening their mouths during the song? And I look and I think, okay, maybe you don't feel like your voice is that good, but are any of us that great of singers? I mean, I know I'm not. But do I still open my mouth and try to praise God? And there's something about when we sing together, we're kind of drowned it out. We don't hear ourselves as much, do we? And so the beauty is that our voices blend, and there's a beauty in corporate worship when we all participate. But I see teenagers, they sit up there in the front, and I can almost draw a line. It's kind of interesting. The ones who aren't singing up there, I can look out and their parents aren't singing either. And I wonder, where did they learn to not participate? They never saw their parents participating. Folks, worship is not a spectator sport. We don't come to be entertained. We don't come to be presented to. We are the presenters before the God who is our audience, who made us, who we are here to worship. Now, do we get a benefit from it? Obviously. We have the teaching and admonishing aspect. We have the fellowship aspect. But we're here on Sunday primarily because we're here to honor God with our worship. We're here to sing praise to Him. We're here to talk to Him. We're here to remember His Son. We're here to give back to Him. And we're here to hear more about Him from His Word. And so that's why we are here. And so it's not about just sitting and just watching it go by. We ought to participate when we get here. And like I said, our example means so much, because if the kids don't see us participating, they're probably not going to either. And they're always going to refer back to that, at least in their mind, that, hey, they didn't do it, so I don't have to either. And so it's so sad when that happens. But if we are proactive in that area and we do our best to show them that we're interested in worship, they're going to be more interested in it. And again, our example means so much to those around us. And so let's make sure that we get plugged in ourselves. Okay, the last thing under this same point about showing them by example is this. It's about relationship, not ritual. Do we tend to get in a rut sometimes in worship? We tend to come in, I don't know if y'all change your order of worship up much. I don't think we've changed ours in 3 or 4 years. We used to change it a little bit just to keep it from being, the same. But we have our 3 songs: prayer, song, Lord's Supper, song, scripture reading, sermon, invitation song, closing prayer. Okay, that's our order every Sunday, and it can become a ritual, can it not? We can do it without thinking. We know what's coming next. You can see people already moving toward getting their Lord's Supper because they know what's coming next. Of course, we have it on the bulletin, but still, we're creatures of habit, and we know. But listen, if it's just a ritual, if it's just something we come and do every Sunday, and there's no relationship with God, then we've missed it. We've missed the whole point of why we're there. And so, folks, it's got to be about relationship with God. I didn't hear a whole lot of that growing up. It was more about show up, walk the line, behave, do your best to be as perfect as possible, and maybe if the Lord comes back on the right day, you'll get to go to heaven. I mean, that sounds a lot like the sermons I heard, okay? So I was all about doing everything just right as much as I could. And there wasn't a whole lot said about God's love and relationship with Him. And then I got older and I started realizing, okay, the Bible has a lot to say about that. Matter of fact, think about the scriptures that say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." That sounds like a relationship word, knowing, right? And then you start thinking about the greatest command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. That sounds pretty relational to me if I'm supposed to love Him back as He has loved me, and to love my neighbor as myself. That tells me that, hey, a relationship with God is possible, and it's something that we ought to pursue. And when we think about why we come to worship, we show up because we want to honor the God that we are getting closer and closer to. And by the way, worship helps draw us closer to God. And if you want your children to be faithful to that God, you're going to help them to see that they need to have their own relationship with Him as they grow older as well. And it can be had. Now, I can tell you, as a 15-year-old new Christian, certain people maybe had a relationship with God, but I was not going to be one of them because I had no idea. How do you love a God you can't see, you can't hear, you can't touch? That was foreign to me. I was like, how do you do that? I mean, it was almost kind of like this fantasy, this fairy tale type thing. And I knew it wasn't, but I just thought, I just don't know how to get there. And then I've realized that it's like any other relationship. Not that you bring God down to your level, but that God is a God that you can have a relationship with, and it takes the same steps to build that relationship with Him as it does one of us. When I first met Christy, we had a couple of folks that played matchmaker with us. And here I am, a single guy in Tuscaloosa. She's gone through a tough divorce, and she's in Florence, and they have us meet. Well, it goes pretty good. It's a little weird when you're 36, 37 years old, and you're starting to think about dating. Instead of, when I was calling girls back when I was a teenager, I was scared I was going to get their parent. Now I'm calling, scared I'm going to get one of the kids. Can I talk to your mom? Of course, if Brooks would have answered, why do you want to talk to my mom? Who are you? Why are you calling our house? So I would have gotten that. But not to belabor the point, Christy and I didn't really know each other at all. We hadn't ever met before, even though I'd lived in Florence for 7 years. We meet, and we talk maybe about 30 minutes or an hour at that first meeting place. We kind of get the word back, hey, we kind of liked each other a little bit and thought we might want to take it a little further. So I played it cool, and I called her Tuesday after I met her on Saturday. Talked about an hour, and I said, can I call you Thursday? Didn't want to seem too eager, And she said yes. So I call her Thursday. Guys, just look down. Just look down. I ended up talking to her for 6 hours that night. I mean, it was in 1 or 2 in the morning. You're like, okay, I hate you. You just ruined my relationship with my wife or my girlfriend, because that's possible for guys to do that. Okay, so here I am. I'm talking. Why did we talk for so long? We're getting to know each other. She's telling me about her family. I'm telling her about my family, about our work, about our life, just everything. And we're just kind of just talking and revealing everything about what we want the other one to know. And that's how you get to know people, is it not? Is communicating with them. The more you talk to them, the more they talk to you, the more you know each other. Same is true with God, folks. It's not that hard. The more you talk to Him, the more you allow Him to talk to you through His Word, and the more you're walking in the same direction, guess what? His likes are going to become your likes. I didn't like Mexican food till I married my wife. Now we go to Rosie's about once every 2 weeks, okay? So, I mean, there are times where that relationship ends up becoming, I hate to say it, some people end up looking like each other the older they get. Y'all ever seen couples like that? That they just look like each other. And so that's the goal, is we want to look like our Father, do we not? We want to look like God the closer we get to Him. And so you get the point. And so tonight, I hope this has helped. I hope it's helped not only parents and grandparents about helping our children to know who God is and to worship Him, but I hope it was good for all of us just to be reminded as Christians how important it is for us to worship God and to be faithful to Him in that, and to have that relationship and walk with Him. And so tonight, if you don't have that relationship, the good news is you can still have that, because God is always wanting that. He's always ready. And so if you've never become a Christian, if you need to make your life right with Him, we're all here to help you. And that's the beauty of the church. We're all here as sinners that are forgiven, and yet we want you to have what we have, not because we're any better, but because we have that relationship. It means we're on our way to heaven, and we want you to go with us. And so if we can help you with any need, we ask that you come as we stand and as we sing.
Hello, my name's Philip Goad, and I'm privileged to serve as the preacher here at North Highlands Church of Christ. You may have heard something in today's message that has you asking some questions, either about the topic we just covered or maybe about our North Highlands Church family. If so, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out. We'd love to field your question. In fact, we'd love to set up a time to study the Bible with you. And if you're interested in that, we'll set up a time that works well for you. I'd also like to invite you to come out and connect with us in person. We'd love for you to worship with us. Sunday mornings at 9:30, we have worship, followed by Bible classes for all ages. We come back on Sunday evenings at 6 o'clock for another time of Bible study. And then on Wednesdays, we have 2 opportunities. We have a 2 p.m. Bible study for folks who don't need to be out in the evening. And then at 6:30 p.m., we also have a Bible study time, classes for all ages. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we have a food bank. It's open the third Saturday of each month from 9 to 10 a.m. And so if you know of somebody in our community, in our county, that would be able to take advantage of this, please pass the word about the food bank at North Highlands, third Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. Again, we thank you for connecting with us today, and we hope you'll be back online connected with us again very soon.